Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're zeroing in on something quite specific. We're taking a look at a particular substance through the lens of a classic text,
That's right. We're talking about antimonium crudum.
which is also known as black sulfide of antimony, just for clarity. And the text we're using as our guide today is William Boericke's Materia Medica, a foundational work in homeopathic medicine.
Exactly. And our mission really is to act as your guides through Boericke's description. We want to pull out the most interesting bits, the key characteristics that he highlights for antimonium crudum.
We're basically building a profile based only on what this specific source tells us. It lays out how antimonium crudum is viewed as a remedy picture and what signs, what symptoms might point to it according to the system. It's a fascinating window into one historical way of thinking about health.
Okay, so let's start digging into that profile. Boericke kicks off with what he calls the true guiding symptoms. These are presented as the absolute core features.
And right away, there's a really specific pairing mentioned, excessive irritability and fretfulness that goes hand in hand with a thickly coated white tongue. The text even says, as if whitewashed. That's quite a visual.
It really is. And according to Boericke, that combination, the mood and the tongue, is central. Beyond that, he immediately flags sensitivity to external things like temperature and water. He says conditions are often aggravated, so made worse by both heat and cold bathing. And also that people needing this might not be able to stand the heat of the sun.
So extremes and water seem to be triggers here in this text. Although, interestingly, I noticed later it says moist warmth can actually be better. So maybe a little bit of nuance there.
That's a good catch. Yeah, a potential contrast to keep in mind. Boericke also gets some general observations like a tendency to gain weight and this rather curious point about an absence of pain sometimes where you'd normally expect it. And gout is mentioned too, but specifically linked with stomach or gastric symptoms.
Okay, so the stomach pops up early. Seems important. Let's explore the mind picture next, because the description here suggests a pretty strong mental and emotional component for antimonium crudum.
Oh, definitely. The text outlines some very specific states. Someone might be much concerned about his fate, anxious about the future, or they might be cross and contradictive.
What does that mean exactly, contradictive?
The source clarifies. It means whatever is done fails to give satisfaction. Nothing pleases them. There's also being sulky, where the person just doesn't want to speak. And generally peevish, just vexed for no real reason.
And then there's that one detail I found this really striking. Boericke describes the child cannot bear to be touched or looked at.
Yes.
Gets angry at any attention. That paints such a specific picture, doesn't it? Sort of fragile or hypersensitive.
It's a very powerful image he uses there, to convey that extreme irritability. He also mentions a sentimental mood, briefly.
Okay, so moving from the mind, let's look at some physical things the text describes. Maybe head, eyes, ears, nose.
Sure. Headaches get a mention, and true to form for Materia Medica, they're linked to specific triggers. They can be worse on the top of the head, the vertex, or when going upstairs. Also from bathing, there's that water sensitivity again, and importantly from a disordered stomach, especially after sweets like candy or drinking acid wines, you see that connection. Bathing, stomach.
Yeah, it's a recurring theme, definitely. What about the eyes?
For eyes, Boericke notes things like raw and fissured canthe, the corners of the eyes getting raw and cracked. Also chronic blepharitis, which is inflamed eyelids, and pustules.
And the nose.
Nostrils can be chapped and covered with crusts, according to the text. And eczema around the nose, sore, cracked, scurfy. For the ears, it lists things like redness, swelling, pain, ringing, even deafness, and a moist eruption around them.
Okay, let's tackle what seems like a really central area for antimonium crudum in this source. The mouth and throat and, especially that tongue.
Absolutely crucial in Boericke's picture. We have to emphasize that key symptom again. Tongue-coated thick white, as if whitewashed. He really presents that as a primary visual clue.
You wouldn't miss that. What other mouth things does he list?
Well, there are cracks in the corners of the mouth, dry lips, saliva tasting salty, lots of slimy mucus. Gums might detach from the teeth and bleed easily. Canker sores, a raw palate, and a sort of happy or pasty taste in the mouth.
And here's that odd detail again. No thirst, generally speaking.
Right. It seems counterintuitive with all the potential stomach upset, but the text explicitly says no thirst. Although, as you pointed out, it does mention thirst can appear in the evening and at night.
Yeah.
but that general lack is noted.
Yeah, that's quite specific. And throat symptoms.
Thick yellowish mucus dripping down from the back of the nose, needing to hawk or clear the throat often, laryngitis, and a rough voice, maybe from overuse.
Right, so the gastric sphere, stomach, and bowels seems like another major focus area in Boericke's description.
Definitely cornerstone. The text mentions a loss of appetite, but with a specific desire for acids, for pickles, and again, thirst mainly noted in the evening and night.
And the indigestion specifics.
Detailed quite clearly. Irritations, burping, that taste of the food just eaten, heartburn, nausea, vomiting, and there's a very specific description for children, vomiting after nursing.
Ah, yes.
The milk comes up curdled, and the child refuses to nurse afterwards and is described as being very cross. See? There's that irritability again, directly linked to the stomach upset.
It keeps weaving back in. And the text lists clear triggers for these stomach and bowel problems too, right?
Yes, very clearly. Things like bread and pastry, acids, sour wine, cold bathing, there it is again, overheating, and hot weather, a lot of overlap with the general aggravations.
Makes sense. Any other stomach-related points?
Constant belching, bloating after meals, a sweetish kind of watery fluid coming up into the mouth, water brash, and that mention of gout potentially moving to the stomach or bowels.
Okay, and what about the bowels themselves? Stool characteristics.
Boericke gets quite descriptive. Anal itching is mentioned. And a key pattern, especially noted in older people, is diarrhea alternating with constipation.
Ah, okay, that alternating pattern.
Exactly. And the diarrhea triggers, pretty much the same as the stomach triggers: acids, sour wine, baths, overeating. The stool itself is described in various ways: slimy, flatulent mucus piles where mucus keeps oozing. Sometimes hard lumps mixed with watery discharge, inflammation like catarrhal proctitis, or even stools that seem to be entirely mucus.
Wow, okay. Very detailed. So we've covered mind, gut, head. Let's quickly touch on some other physical systems mentioned by Boericke. What about urinary?
For the urinary system, he notes frequent urination, maybe with burning, associated backache, and the urine might be cloudy, turbid, and have a foul odor.
And male-female specific symptoms.
In males, eruptions, impotence, or testicular atrophy are listed. For females, specific menstrual issues. Periods might be early, heavy, or suppressed by cold bathing, that water link again. Also, pelvic pressure, ovarian tenderness, and a particular type of leukorrhea or vaginal discharge, watery, acrid, maybe lumpy.
Okay. Respiratory system.
Yeah.
Anything stand out there?
Yes, actually, a very specific trigger or modality, as it's called. The cough is worse when coming into a warm room from the cold air.
Oh, interesting. The opposite of what you might expect sometime.
Exactly, quite distinctive. Also, burning and itching in the chest, feeling oppressed, losing your voice from getting overheated. There's the heat sensitivity and the voice itself being harsh or badly pitched.
And the back.
Simply notes itching and pain in the neck and back.
Got it. Okay, let's move to extremities and skin. Boericke seems to include some really specific, quite memorable symptoms here for Antimonium crudum.
He really does. For the limbs, twitching muscles, jerks in the arms, and arthritic pain in the fingers are mentioned.
But the nails,
Yeah.
that
Good.
caught my eye.
Yes. Very distinctive according to this source. The nails are brittle and they grow out of shape, distorted somehow.
That's such a peculiar detail to include. And the skin growths sound quite characteristic too.
Definitely. Horny warts, specifically mentioned on hands and soles, inflamed corns, and the feet are described as very tender, often covered with lard, horny patches, or calluses. Warts come up again under the general skin section too, sometimes compared to other remedies like thuja or causticum in this system.
And wasn't there a really odd combination involving the hands?
Ah, yes. Weakness and shaking in the hands, particularly when writing,
Okay,
which is then followed by offensive flatulence.
right. That's unexpected. A link between hand tremor and gas just shows how these pictures are built in the source, linking disparate things. What about general skin eruptions?
The text notes eczema often appears alongside the stomach problems linking systems again. Pimples, vesicles, pustules are listed.
And the cold bathing sensitivities, that show up with skin too.
It does. Sensitivity to cold bathing is mentioned again here. Scabs are described specifically. Thick, hard, honey-colored. Other possibilities include hives, urticaria, a measle-like rash, generally dry skin, even mentions of dry gangrene, and scaly pustular eruptions that burn and itch worse at night.
Okay, nearly there. Let's just cover sleep and fever, according to Boericke.
For sleep, one specific point highlighted is continual drowsiness, particularly noted in old people.
And fever.
Well, there's feeling chilly even when in a warm room, which is, interesting given some of the heat aggravations elsewhere. And intermittent fever, which comes with a whole cluster of symptoms. Boericke lists disgust for food, nausea, vomiting, burping, that typical coated tongue again, and diarrhea. Hot sweat is also mentioned.
Shoot. Okay, we have really covered a lot of detail from this one description. Maybe we should quickly summarize the main modalities, the things that make symptoms better or worse, according to this text.
Good idea. So, broadly speaking, things are described as worse in the evening from heat, from acids, from wine, from water, especially washing or bathing, and from wet poultices. And better. Better seems to be in the open air when resting, and as we noted earlier, from moist warmth, which contrasts with that general cold bathing aggravation. A bit of complexity there.
Right. Now, the last part of these materia medica entries is usually relationships. What does Boericke say about how antimonium crudum relates to other substances in his system?
Yeah, he lists comparisons, for instance, antimonium chloridum and antimon iodat. He might highlight similar symptoms like specific breathing issues or weakness to help differentiate. He also lists pulsatilla, ipecac, and sulfur as remedies to compare it with.
And does he mention any complementary or antidote relationship?
He does. Sulfur is listed as complementary, meaning it might follow antimonium crudum well in treatment, according to this system. And heparsulf is listed as an antidote, something that might counteract its effects.
Oh, and he mentions the dosage typically used within this system, the 3rd to 6th potency.
Okay, so let's try and pull it all together. Based purely on Boericke's text, what's the absolute core picture of antimonium crudum? I think it has to be that signature combination. The extreme irritability, the fretfulness, the child not wanting to be looked at, paired directly with that thick, whitewashed tongue.
Absolutely. And building on that core, this really strong connection to the digestive system, specific kinds of indigestion, specific triggers like certain foods, wine, bathing, heat.
Right, and then those very particular physical details, especially on the skin and extremities. You've got the brittle, distorted nails.
Yeah, forget those.
The horny warts,
Yeah.
the super tender feet with corns, really quite graphic descriptions.
And finally, those striking modalities.
Yeah.
The general aggravation from heat and especially cold bathing or washing contrasted maybe with a relief from moist warmth. And that specific cough, worse coming into a warm room. It's been quite a detailed exploration, focusing just on this one source.
It really has. And it leaves you with a question, doesn't it? How does a text like this, operating within its own specific tradition, go about linking symptoms that seem, unrelated on the surface?
Yeah, like connecting that specific tongue coating to that specific type of irritability in a child. Or linking problems with fingernails to stomach upset, or even, hand weakness to flatulence.
Exactly. What does that whole process tell us about how this particular source, this system, constructs what it calls a remedy picture? How it takes physical signs, emotional states, reactions to the environment, and weaves them all together into one profile.
It's definitely a different way of looking at things, a unique lens.
Certainly is. Something interesting for you to think about.
Indeed. Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.